Hello and welcome back to this series on positive transitions from the North Somerset Educational Psychology Service. In this video, we are looking at the first of three stages of transition support. We call this the pre-transition stage, and the focus is on preparing young people and key adults for an educational transition. And so, over the next few minutes, we'll focus on how we can involve young people in transition planning, how we can involve key adults, and how we can tailor our support for young people with specific needs. This is the longest of the three top tips videos because preparation is the most important aspect of creating positive transitions. So the first step of the first stage of creating positive transitions is to involve young people in their transition planning. We can do this via two main activities. Firstly, gathering information from the young people directly, and secondly, sharing important information with the young people about their new setting. Let's start by discussing how we gather young people's views ahead of a transition. The purpose of this phase of transition preparation is to meet our students' basic needs of feeling understood and listened to. We want students to feel that their new setting is prepared for their arrival. So what we will need here is a range of tools which help students express themselves in the method they are most comfortable with, including a writing option, a speaking option, and a drawing option. Bear in mind, some of the tools we discuss in this section and throughout this series may need to be adapted slightly for different age ranges, as the majority of research and resources focused on transition relates to the primary to secondary school transition. Some of the best transition tools are the most versatile and can be used in a variety of ways to gather young people's views. For example, All About Me worksheets with questions or prompts that students can answer in writing, drawing, or verbally. All About Me worksheets can include more sophisticated questions for older students or more basic questions for younger students. We could also use the My Education Journey worksheets. These allow students to tell us their story within education, which can be particularly useful for young people that have experienced disruptions in their schooling or family lives. Another tool we could consider is the Strengths Shield, which encourages a positive focus from young people and can also be completed using writing, speaking, or drawing. Examples of all of these resources and more can be found on the Educational Psychology Service shared drive, which is linked on our resources page on the North Somerset Council website. So the next aspect of involving young people in transitions is about giving them important information. The purpose of this is to help them think about what they need to prepare, like in terms of stationery or PE kit. Also, it's to inform them about any transition days or taster days. And finally, to help them take an active role during the transition process. A nice way of preparing a whole class for a transition is to have a specific lesson, for example, using the lesson plans in the Find Your Feet guide from the Young Minds charity. There are activities discussing what students are worried about, what they might do to cope, and the positives in their lives that will help them enjoy a new school. In addition to teacher-led lessons, we might give students worksheets and other activities to complete which encourage them to research key information about their new school. For example, the Secondary Ready booklet or Moving On Top Tips for Pupils booklet. And finally, many modern secondary schools allow students to take an online or virtual tour of the school site, which can help students familiarise themselves with the environment before they visit. Further examples of lessons and activities are available to download from the Educational Psychology Service website. So now let's look at the second phase of transition preparation, which is about involving key adults in the process. This has two main aspects, which are informing parents about how they can prepare for transitions and sharing information about students between settings. If we start by informing parents about transitions, our aim is to help them understand what is involved during transition and increase their confidence in their ability to help their children prepare. And there are a range of examples of parent-focused resources which help with transition preparation. For example, there are pre-written guides for parents with communicating and gathering information from schools, including where parents will hear about school trips, homework, or how to inform school about absences. There are also specific booklets and pamphlets that we can direct parents to, which help them prepare for transitions. For example, the Parent Kind School Ready guides for primary school and secondary school. Both of these include top tips about practical things like measuring for uniform and social and emotional things like making friends and coping with change. For parents preparing themselves and their children for starting school, the startingreception.co.uk website and the BBC Bitesize website both have a huge range of guides. Or we might link parents and carers to video guidance about transitions into secondary, like the Find Your Feet parent webinar on screen. For colleges and post-16 transitions, there are also parent and carer guides to applying for and selecting courses, personal finance, and activities they can support to help their children develop independence. Don't forget, all of these resources and more can be found at the Educational Psychology Service website on the Resource Library page. And so the second phase of involving key adults in transitions is about sharing information between settings. The most obvious way of doing this is sharing the information we gathered from students at the start of the process with their new school or college. The All About Me sheets, the Strength Shields, and so on for their new teachers or SENCO to look at prior to meeting new students. It's also important to share information we have about students' special educational needs, and in particular, any information we hold about useful support strategies, for example, pupil passports, behaviour support plans, de-escalation plans. And the gold standard method for involving key adults is known as a transition planning meeting. These are reserved for students with special educational needs or disabilities or attendance difficulties, and they involve adults from the current and receiving setting meeting to create targets for transition and associated support strategies. So the final thing we need to do when preparing students for transitions is consider the needs of individuals. A lot of good transition practice is based on preparing a whole class group for a transition. However, research highlights that some groups of young people face specific challenges when they move between education settings. Transition preparation for these groups of young people helps us identify and remove barriers that they might experience when moving from one setting to another. For example, if we're supporting students with special educational needs and disabilities to make a transition, we can use the resources which focus on post-16 transitions for young people with learning disabilities, young people with Down syndrome entering primary schools or moving up to secondary schools or moving on to post-16 settings, or autistic students at all phases of education and into a range of education settings, or students for whom English is an additional language, or students with experiences of the care system, including a fantastic structured workbook produced by the North Somerset Virtual School, or students with existing attendance difficulties, for example using the Pre-Pathway Risk Factors Assessment and Resources Bank for young people at risk of developing emotionally based school avoidance or EBSA. All of the resources shown here and many more are available on the Educational Psychology Service shared drive, which is linked below in the description of this video or can be found by searching for the EPS Resources Library on your preferred search engine. Thanks for watching, and please remain with us for the next video in this series, which covers activities that students can carry out during transition periods.